The reading of my father's will was supposed to bring closure. Instead, it shattered everything I thought I knew. The room was silent, save for the soft flipping of papers and the hum of the ceiling fan. I sat stiffly in a hard-backed chair beside my father's attorney, surrounded by people who suddenly felt like strangers. My stepmother Diane, her son Eric, and two of Dad's business associates who nodded politely but avoided my eyes. I wore a black dress and kept my hair tied back. Simple, respectful. I didn't want a scene. I only wanted what was fair, what I had earned. The lawyer cleared his throat and began. His voice was dry, emotionless. To my stepson, Eric Thomas Caldwell, I leave full ownership of Caldwell Hardware, the lakeside cabin, and all remaining liquid assets. I trust he will continue the family legacy with honor. The words hit me like a slap. I sat still, heart racing, forcing myself to breathe. Then came the part that burned deeper. To my daughter, Evelyn Grace Caldwell, I leave my love and deepest gratitude for her years of care and support. She will understand this decision. That was it. That was all. No share of the company I helped build. No part of the home I was raised in. No mention of the sacrifices I made when Dad was too sick to manage the store alone. No acknowledgement of the years I spent keeping everything afloat while Eric was off networking in Vegas or Thailand. I didn't cry. I didn't ask why. I already knew the answer. This wasn't Dad's decision. This was Diane's manipulation and Eric's entitlement, sealed in ink after months, maybe years of whispers behind closed doors. And they thought I would accept it. They thought I'd just disappear, a footnote in the business my father and I built side by side. But what they didn't count on was that I had kept records. I knew things, and I wasn't going away. If they wanted a clean victory, they should have erased me better. They didn't just cut me out of the will, they started a war. My name is Evelyn Grace Caldwell, and I was my father's only child. Growing up, it was always just the two of us. My mother died when I was 6, complications from a surgery no one saw coming. After that, Dad threw himself into building Caldwell Hardware, a small-town home improvement store that eventually became the backbone of our community. He worked tirelessly, but he never once made me feel like an afterthought. In fact, he did the opposite. He taught me how to read profit margins before I could drive, and how to swing a hammer before I could parallel park. We weren't just father and daughter. We were a team. That changed the day he met Diane. She came into the store asking for paint samples and left with his phone number. Within a year, they were married. I was 19, a sophomore in college, and I'll admit, I tried to be open. But something about Diane always felt off. She was all charm and sweetness in public, but cold and calculated behind closed doors. She inserted herself into every conversation, every decision, every holiday. Within months of moving in, she redecorated the house, rearranged the store's office, and started calling Dad's longtime employees old-fashioned. She made everything hers, even though she had never lifted a box or worked a shift. And then came Eric. He wasn't a child. He was 25 and already nursing a reputation as a party boy who couldn't hold a job. He showed up wearing a leather jacket, driving a car he didn't own, and acting like he was entitled to every square inch of our lives. Dad tried to bring him into the business, but Eric was useless. He'd skip morning meetings, sneak cash from the register, and spend more time flirting with customers than helping them. Every time I called it out, Diane would step in. "Eric just needs time," she'd say. "Evelyn, stop being so controlling." Dad wanted peace, so he'd ask me to let things slide. I did, at first, for years. After college, I came home and helped run the store full-time. Dad started slowing down, bad knees, high blood pressure, and then the stroke. I took over almost everything: the books, the inventory, the vendor contracts, even staff management. Eric, meanwhile, was always working on something big. He spent most of his time in the break room, laughing into his phone or disappearing for business lunches. Diane made excuses. Dad stayed silent. When Dad had his second stroke, it was me who called the ambulance, me who slept in the hospital chair, me who signed the papers, managed the store, kept things together. I asked Diane once, just once, if Dad had updated his will or if he wanted to appoint a medical proxy. She bristled, like I was trying to cash in on his condition. After that, she locked down access to everything. Bills were redirected. Documents disappeared. She even changed the office door lock at the store. It was subtle at first, the way they edged me out. One day, I came into the office and found Eric sitting at Dad's desk. He gave me a tight smile and said, "You should really take a vacation, Evelyn. You've been so tense." I knew then something had shifted, and I didn't trust it. But I kept my head down. I documented everything: bank statements, discrepancies in invoices, handwritten notes from Dad. I wasn't going to fight them, not without proof. Then Dad died. Suddenly. Peacefully, they said. I didn't even get to say goodbye. Diane planned the funeral without asking me. She gave Eric the eulogy slot. She chose a photo of Dad I hated, one where he looked tired and gray. She made it all look neat, curated, like we were a happy blended family. I stood at the gravesite with clenched fists. I had given everything to Dad's legacy. And now I was watching it be handed over to the woman who hijacked it, and her spoiled son who barely knew what a ledger was. But I wasn't done. They thought I would go quietly, that I'd mourn and move on. They had no idea who they were dealing with. In the weeks following the will reading, I went quiet, but I didn't retreat. Diane and Eric assumed my silence was defeat. I let them think that. I smiled at neighbors, accepted condolences with grace, and told friends I was taking time to process. But behind the scenes, I was building a case, not just to protect what I had earned, but to uncover how they had orchestrated this betrayal. The first red flag came from the bank. I had joint access to some of Dad's business accounts for years. After the funeral, I tried logging in to print some old financial reports I'd stored there, only to find my access revoked. I called the bank manager, a woman named Teresa, who'd known my father since the beginning. "I'm sorry, Evelyn," she said. "Your father removed you from the account 2 months ago. Eric's now the sole authorized party." That made no sense. Dad had been in and out of the hospital. Some days, he couldn't even hold a pen without trembling. 2 months ago, he could barely speak. There was no way he personally went in and made those changes. Something was wrong. I visited the store late one night when I knew Eric wouldn't be around. I still had a spare key, and I let myself into the office I used to run. My heart ached seeing how messy it had become. Papers strewn everywhere, unopened mail piling up, receipts shoved into drawers. I opened the locked cabinet where Dad used to keep backups of signed documents. It was almost empty, except for one slim folder labeled Estate Planning Draft. Inside, I found a copy of a will dated 18 months ago. That version split the business equally between Eric and me. There was a handwritten note clipped to it. Just one sentence in my father's shaky cursive. "This is fair. Make sure Evelyn gets what she's due." I took a photo of it. I didn't take the original. Not yet. The next day I called Dad's old estate attorney, not the one who had read the final will, but the one he'd worked with for years. A soft-spoken man named Peter Langston. I told him who I was. There was a long pause. "I was surprised when your father dropped me," he said quietly. "He said the family was going in another direction." but that wasn't like him. "Do you remember anything about the changes he wanted to make?" I asked. Peter paused again, then lowered his voice. "I remember he told me, if something happens, Evelyn knows what to do." He seemed worried, like someone was pushing him. That was all I needed to hear. The final will, the one that cut me out, was drawn up and notarized during the last month of Dad's life, while he was on heavy medication and barely coherent most days. There was no way he had the mental capacity to understand what he was signing. Diane must have planned it. Eric may have helped, or maybe he was just happy to benefit. But the truth was within reach now, and I wasn't going to let it stay buried. I began consulting with a probate attorney, quietly, discreetly. I gathered evidence, medical records, dated prescriptions, a timeline of Dad's decline, the handwriting samples, the old will, my records from the store's finances. I even found a voicemail from Dad, sent just weeks before his final hospitalization, where he said, "Don't let them push you out, Evie." I saved every detail, cross-referenced timelines, labeled folders, built the paper trail. Diane and Eric didn't know it yet, but I was coming for everything they stole, not just for me, but for my father's legacy. They built their story on forged trust and fading signatures. I was going to burn it to the ground with the truth. If I was going to fight Diane and Eric, I couldn't afford to play fair. Not with people who had turned my father's last days into a con. I didn't want pity. I wanted results. The first step was getting the new will thrown into question, and that meant proving Dad wasn't mentally fit when it was signed. My lawyer, Meredith Choi, was a bulldog in heels. She reviewed the evidence I'd collected and immediately saw the cracks. "This case isn't just about inheritance," she told me. "It's elder abuse, and we're going to make them regret underestimating you." We filed a formal petition to challenge the will in probate court, citing medical incapacity and undue influence. That alone sent a shockwave through Diane's world. The smug silence from her end broke within days. I received a cease and desist letter from their lawyer, filled with threats and bluster, but no substance. Meredith called it desperation disguised as confidence. We didn't flinch, but court battles take time. I needed to hit them where it would hurt most, in reputation and revenue. So I quietly reached out to a few longtime employees at Caldwell Hardware, people who respected my father, people who'd seen the shift after Diane and Eric took over. Most were cautious, but a few trusted me enough to speak up. What I learned made my blood boil. Eric had cut staff hours and rerouted vendor accounts to new partners, businesses he had personal ties to, charging inflated rates. He was siphoning money out of the store, under Diane's nose or perhaps with her blessing. Employees were frustrated and scared. The store's customer base was shrinking. Long-time clients were already leaving, so I helped speed things along. Using an anonymous email account, I forwarded the financial irregularities and vendor connections to the local paper's business columnist. I knew she wouldn't publish everything outright, but she'd start asking questions. Then I took it further. I contacted the Better Business Bureau and submitted a detailed complaint, attaching statements and invoices that highlighted suspicious transactions. I also sent a formal report to the state's Consumer Fraud Division. Publicly, I stayed quiet. But behind the scenes, I was peeling back every layer of their deceit. 2 weeks later, I made my boldest move. I approached Caldwell Hardware's 3 largest commercial clients, companies I had personally brought in years ago, and told them the truth. I laid out the mismanagement, the hidden costs, the shady vendors. I didn't ask for loyalty, I showed them receipts. 2 of the 3 immediately pulled their contracts. The third said he'd reevaluate. That same week, Diane called me. It was the first time since the funeral. "Evelyn," she began, voice tight, "you're going to ruin everything your father built." I almost laughed. "No, Diane, you already did that. I'm just cleaning up the mess." "You don't understand the full picture." "I understand enough," I said, "and so will the court." She hung up without another word. By the time our court date was set, Caldwell Hardware was bleeding. The public pressure, combined with a pending fraud investigation, had shaken their confidence. But I wasn't after revenge for revenge's sake. I wanted the truth exposed. I wanted my father's legacy restored. And now I had every tool I needed. Let them keep pretending they were in control. In a matter of weeks, they'd be standing in front of a judge with no defense, no income, and no way to hide what they'd done. The courtroom was quiet except for the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional shuffle of papers. My heart thudded in my chest as I took my seat beside Meredith. Diane and Eric sat at the opposite table, flanked by their lawyer, both looking far less polished than usual. Eric's tan had faded, his once cocky posture had wilted into something hunched and uncertain. Diane looked tight-lipped and pale, gripping the edge of the table like she was bracing for a storm. She should have been. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 60s, reviewed the file for a moment before nodding at Meredith. "You may proceed." Meredith stood, calm and lethal. "Your Honor, we intend to prove that the last will submitted by Diane Caldwell and her son Eric is invalid due to the deceased's lack of mental capacity at the time of signing, and that said, will was the result of deliberate, undue influence." Then she began to unfold the case, methodically, ruthlessly. She presented my father's medical records, noting his confusion, disorientation, and inability to even sign his name consistently in the final weeks. She showed the court copies of his prescriptions, medications that caused drowsiness, hallucinations, and cognitive impairment. Then she introduced the earlier version of the will, signed and notarized while my father was still coherent, where I was listed as co-heir to both the estate and the business. Meredith held up the note in my father's handwriting. "This is fair. Make sure Evelyn gets what she's due." The courtroom was silent. Diane's lawyer objected weakly, citing chain of custody issues. The judge waved it off. "You'll have your turn." When Eric was called to the stand, he fumbled. He contradicted himself on dates, claimed he didn't know about the will changes, then admitted to driving Dad to the notary. Meredith pushed him just hard enough to show cracks. Diane, called next, was careful, but not careful enough. Under questioning, she admitted that she had helped prepare documents and had assisted in managing Dad's medications. Meredith asked whether my father had reviewed the final draft before signing. Diane hesitated. He trusted us. But did he read it? Silence. "No further questions," Meredith said. The judge called a recess, her expression unreadable. I stepped outside, breathing hard. The air was sharp and cold against my skin. When we returned, the judge spoke with precision. "I find substantial evidence that the decedent was not of sound mind when the contested will was signed. Furthermore, there is credible indication of undue influence exerted by the respondents." She looked directly at Diane. "The will is invalid. The estate shall revert to the previous legal version." My breath caught. "All assets are to be redistributed in accordance with that version," the judge concluded. "This court is adjourned." The gavel hit the bench like thunder. I had done it. After everything, the silence, the schemes, the betrayal, I had cleared my father's name and reclaimed what was mine. Diane and Eric sat frozen, stunned, as the courtroom emptied around them. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The week after the ruling, I stood alone inside Caldwell Hardware, listening to the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. It was early, too early for customers, but I liked it that way. Peaceful, honest. The store smelled the same, sawdust, paint, and motor oil. But it felt different now. It felt like mine again. Eric and Diane were gone. The court's decision had not only voided the contested will, but also revoked their authority over the business. The paperwork was signed. Ownership was legally transferred. I was back in control. They didn't fight it. After their humiliation in court, Diane had gone silent. Eric tried to call once, probably fishing for a settlement, but I blocked the number. There would be no quiet payouts, no off-the-record deals. Let them sit with what they'd done. I spent the next few weeks undoing the damage. I rehired 2 of the senior staff Diane had fired. I called back loyal vendors, explaining the situation. Most were relieved. One even said, "We were waiting for you to come back." Customers returned too. Word had spread. Small towns don't keep secrets long, and apparently people were rooting for me more than I knew. Still, rebuilding wasn't just about logistics. It was emotional. I walked through each aisle remembering days spent at Dad's side, me as a kid holding a clipboard, him explaining why good service mattered more than flashy signs. I dusted off old ledgers and found pages in his handwriting. It felt like he was still here, quietly guiding me. I also reopened his old office. For the first time since he passed, I sat at his desk and opened the bottom drawer. There, nestled under a stack of business cards, I found a sealed envelope addressed to me. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a short note. "Evie, I know Diane's been whispering. I'm sorry for the mess. If anything ever feels wrong, trust your gut. You always had the strongest compass. I believe in you. Love, Dad." It wasn't legal proof. It wouldn't have held up in court. But it was everything I needed. Proof that he knew. Proof that he trusted me. I placed the letter in a frame and set it by the cash register. People ask me now if I regret it. The court battle, the stress, the ugliness. I don't. Because justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it walks quietly through the front door of a hardware store and sets things back in order. I didn't win just the store. I restored the truth. And that, above all, was what mattered. A month after the court ruling, I found myself standing at the edge of my father's favorite hiking trail just outside of town, overlooking the lake. It was the place he always took me when life felt too heavy. After Mom died, after bad report cards, after our first big fight, he'd say, "Out here it's just us. No noise. No pretending." That's exactly what I needed. The wind rustled the trees gently, and the late afternoon sun cast golden streaks across the water. I took a deep breath and closed my eyes, letting it all wash over me, not just the victory, but the years that led up to it. For so long I had carried the weight of being the responsible one. I had stayed behind when others ran. I had been quiet when I should have screamed. I had done what was right, even when it hurt. And still I'd been cut out, betrayed, dismissed, underestimated. But I wasn't angry anymore. Diane and Eric hadn't just stolen from me. They had tried to erase me from my own story. And I had reclaimed it, page by page, with patience and proof. I had honored my father not by seeking revenge, but by protecting what he built, by defending the truth he didn't get the chance to. And in doing that, I found something else, something unexpected. I found myself, not just the daughter, the business manager, or the quiet fighter, but the woman who finally stopped asking for permission to be heard. Back at the store, I'd made a few changes. I renamed the office Franklin's Corner in honor of my dad. I started a scholarship fund in his name for local trade students, and every month I hosted a small business night, inviting women entrepreneurs to share stories, ideas, and support. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about impact. I still keep his note by the register, his quiet belief in me, written in his own hand. Sometimes customers ask about it. I tell them, that was the day everything changed. That's the day I remembered who I was. And when I leave the store at night, locking the front doors, I always glance back one last time, not out of fear, but pride, because no matter how dark things got, I found my way through. I didn't just expose the lies. I built something stronger with the truth, something no one can take away from me again.